Okay. Maybe you've encountered the reference of to this clip of a guy yelling the name of Stella before and wondered what it was all about. That famous scene is actually from the play we're talking about today, and after today, you will know what it's all about. So, today we're talking about Tennessee Williams and his play called A Streetcar Named Desire. This brilliant piece of American drama explores themes such as sexuality and desire, homosexuality, madness, domestic violence, rape, class, getting older, and masculine and feminine gender roles. There have been lots of adaptations, and the play continues to be popular today. There was even a performance of it as recently as 2023 that's supposed to be pretty intense. So that would be interesting to check out. The play has been adapted into films, TV shows, operas, and ballets, and has won numerous awards. But before we get into the play, I want to give you some background information about Williams. Oh, there's the poster from the 2023 version of the play. That looks pretty interesting. So, born Thomas Lanier Williams, he was born in Columbus, Mississippi in 1911 to a poor family. His father was a traveling shoe salesman who eventually moved into the family into a tenement in St. Louis. As a child, Williams nearly died of diphtheria caused by an infection, which left him frail and sickly for a year. His father disliked what he perceived as weakness and viewed it as effeminacy in his son. Added to this, his father was also abusive and alcoholic, so it was an unhappy marriage. This rough, dysfunctional home life becomes creative fodder for Williams's writing. At the age of 16, he publishes his first story. He tried college a few different times, but having to work to support himself and go to school was tough. I think we can all relate to that struggle. So it takes him a while to finish. In 1938, he finally earns a BA in English from the State University of Iowa, and he is age 27. So he's writing plays here and there. In 1939, he moves to New Orleans to write for the Works Progress Administration, a federal work program started by President FDR during the Great Depression to help people get back to work. And this program really helped a lot of artists, musicians, and writers survive during the Great Depression. So at this time, Williams is living in the French Quarter of New Orleans, where he's going to get the setting that we'll later see in his play that we're talking about today. Between 1940 and 1945, Williams is living on grants from the Rockefeller Foundation and American Academy of Arts and Letters. He's also getting some income by attempting to write film scripts in Hollywood, and he's getting some wages as a waiter entertainer in Greenwich Village. That makes me think of Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times and the jobs that the tramp and the gamin had toward the end of the film. So in 1944, Williams gets his first big hit with The Glass Menagerie, a semi-autobiographical play about Williams and his mother and his sister who's shy and ill. It's a memory play told from the character Tom's POV. It reflects some real-life issues that Williams was going through. His sister Rose had schizophrenia and also underwent a partial lobotomy, and she is institutionalized. So there's some serious drama, and the play is going to get into some of that. William also published a number of one-act plays, such as 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. So it's that would be interesting to look at, to see short form drama. And then he writes and produces A Streetcar Named Desire in 1947. And when New York audiences saw this play, they knew a major playwright had arrived. It won a Pulitzer Prize. The play combines sensuality, melodrama, and lyrical symbolism. A film version is created a year later by Elia Kazan. Williams and Kazan have a long friendship and partnership for over a decade working together. After that, Williams produces another really well-known play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which wins the New York Drama Critics Circle Award and a Pulitzer Prize. So, also on a side note, Williams also was gay, but he had accepted this in himself in the late 1930s and he had a long-term partner with actor Frank Merlo. These were very happy, productive years. But Williams also suffered from bouts of depression and was an alcoholic, and he did abuse drugs as well in the form of pills. So in 1983, when he dies, it's likely due to a drug or alcohol overdose. So we've got some highs, successes here, and struggles. So let's go ahead and talk about A Streetcar Named Desire. We'll start off with a brief introduction to the play and the plot. It was first performed, as we mentioned, on Broadway. The play tells the story of Blanche Dubois, a former Southern belle who, after the loss of the family plantation home, Belle Reve, to creditors, comes to the city and moves in with her sister Stella and her kind of brutish husband Stanley Kowalski in a rundown apartment in New Orleans. Blanche's presence disrupts the already pretty tense relationship between Stella and Stanley, and this leads to a clash of wills and desires between Blanche and Stanley with tragic consequences. Along the way, Blanche meets Mitch, a poker player friend of Stanley's, who has more well-mannered, he's more gentle, and he's kind of lonely. The two of them hit it off, they're flirting, they seem to really like each other. This seems to offer Blanche an opportunity to kind of start over, but before that can happen, her past catches up with her. So, Streetcar really challenges our sympathies and judgments as we witness the complex and flawed characters struggle with their passions, illusions, and fates. The play features some of the most iconic roles in theater history, as seen with Blanche, Stanley, Stella, and Mitch, and it has been performed by many celebrated actors such as Marlon Brando, Vivien Leigh, Jessica Tandy, Alec Baldwin, Cate Blanchett, and Gillian Anderson. So, here we go. Maybe it lets me edit it a little bit. I don't know. Hopefully. For you. This is a play that is as much about acting as it is about anything else, so it really matters who would play the roles in the play. So if you were going to pick new actors to star in Streetcar today, who would you pick? As you think about who you would cast for these roles, you should consider not only the physical and psychological traits of the characters, but also the themes and messages that the play conveys and how different actors would interpret those in different ways. So these should be living actors. You would want to take into account things like age, gender, race. However, these need not be determining factors. You could, for example, maybe you would change the gender of a character, possibly, if there was a good reason for doing so. However, you would also need to have a rationale for why you chose the actors you did. If you have time, you may also consider whether you would stage this as a written play or maybe in a different context. This is a play in which the acting is very important. So which characters do you think we are supposed to sympathize with? Is there a villain here? If so, why or why not? Let me know. You can tell me who you would pick in your discussion post. We will, in our discussion today, we're going to talk about character, and we will talk also about language. We'll start off with a discussion of character and the different characters that are in the play and how they are portrayed through acting. So what is acting? Acting is the act of portraying a character or telling a story through speech, movement, and expression. But in this process, conflicting goals might emerge in the way the performance or the director and the actors shape the meaning of the play. And this can be seen in the various ways that Streetcar has been portrayed. During this time period, a type of acting emerges called method acting. You might have heard of it before, which is a particular type of training that strives for a more realistic acting. Method acting is a style of acting that aims to create a realistic and emotional portrayal of characters by drawing on the actor's own experiences and feelings. So method actors often immerse themselves in the role, adopting the character's habits, mannerisms, and background. Some famous method actors are Marlon Brando, who played Stanley in A Streetcar Named Desire, Robert De Niro, Daniel Day-Lewis, Meryl Streep. Method acting can be contrasted with classical or technical acting, which relies more on external factors such as voice, movement, and costume, and less on the actor's inner state. So method acting began to be incorporated into American theater in the 1930s. It was brought to the U.S. by Leo Bukagov and Richard Boleslavsky, Maria Uspinskaya. All right, those names are a mouthful. In 1923. I did my best there. Lee Strasberg, the founder of the Actors Studio, and Stella Adler, who studied with Boleslavsky in the 20s and started their own schools. And other famous writers and actors studied them as well, such as Sophie Treadwell and Marlon Brando. So the purpose of the Stanislavski method is to teach the actor to put the whole gamut of his physical and emotional being into the service of the dramatist's meaning. So a famous director at this time, Harold Clurman, picks up on this method acting, and he takes the Stanislavski method and adapts it into what he calls the famous method. So he's an influential critic and director of the American theater and a co-founder of a group called the Group Theater. Harold Clurman was also a supporter and practitioner of the method acting. Clurman's method is kind of an abbreviation of the Stanislavski method, which was developed by the Russian actor Konstantin Stanislavski for the Moscow Art Theater. In his famous essay on the famous method, he defends the method from its detractors and explains its principles and applications. Clurman argues that the method is not a set of rigid rules, but flexible and a creative approach to acting that helps the actors to understand the character's motivations, emotions, and actions. He asserts that the method is really just the grammar of acting. To quote Clurman, he says, "There have been great actors who never studied grammar, though they usually possess it, but no one on that account proclaims grammar a fake and instruction in the subject futile. And also there was grammar before there were grammarians." So, Clurman believes that the method fosters a deeper connection between the actor and the role, as well as between the actor and the audience. He claims that the method is not only a technique, but a way of life that enriches the actor's artistic and personal development. Some think that it was Marlon Brando who brought method acting into the mainstream, which may have resulted in some unintended bad consequences. We see this most prominently in the different ways actors have portrayed the character Blanche in the play, Streetcar. So, let's talk about the role of acting and Blanche. There is Blanche as written in the play versus how Blanche is acted. So Clurman felt that Blanche, as portrayed by the actress Jessica Tandy, didn't give her fair due. That Blanche was much more than a boozy prostitute. He goes on to say, Tennessee Williams is a poet of frustration, and what his play says is that aspiration, sensitivity, departure from the norm are battered, bruised, and disgraced in our world today. It would be far truer to think of Blanche Du Bois as the potential artist in all of us than as a deteriorated Southern belle. Her lies are part of her will to beauty. Her wretched romanticism is a futile reaching toward a fullness of life. She is not a drunkard. She is not insane. When she is committed to the asylum, she is an almost willing victim of a world that has trapped her and in which she can find peace, only by accepting the verdict of her unfitness for normal life. So, a far deeper interpretation of Blanche there than the portrayal has sometimes seemed to capture. So Clurman felt that there was kind of a misunderstanding of the character of Blanche, and she goes far deeper than some would give her credit for. So then after this, in the same essay on acting, he says, he begins to ponder, what is acting? The actor at very base level is an instrument, one who imitates a series of human events that are not real, but there can be more. The creative actor is the author of the new meaning that a play acquires on the stage, the author of a personal subtext into which the play's lines are absorbed so that a special aesthetic body with an identity of its own is born. An actor who doesn't do this belies the art of the theater. So he's making this case that the acting is going to manifest an additional meaning on top of whatever the playwright already intended in the portrayal on the stage. It's going to add additional interpretive meaning through the process of acting. Which means that's really important how it's done. All right, let's just briefly, we'll talk about language. Again, Arthur Miller weighs in on rhythms of the language in Williams's play, describing the lines were fluent and idiomatic, but at the same time rhythmically composed. One truly heard every word and language flowing from the soul. A writer's soul, a single voice almost miraculously enveloping the stage, but also each character's speech seemed at the same time uncannily his own. So Miller identifies a stylistic coherence in the lines that is also somehow simultaneously individualized for each character. Amazing. How is this done? Dialogue is going to have a lot to do with that. So we'll look just for a moment at some of the dialogue in the play. We've got Blanche's long, syrupy monologues versus Stanley's more terse, briefer dialogue. So here we've got a short excerpt of that. Blanche, would you think it's possible that I was once considered to be attractive? Stanley, your looks are okay. Blanche, I was fishing for a compliment, Stanley. Stanley, I don't go in for that stuff. What stuff? Compliments to women about their looks. I never met a woman that didn't know if she was good looking or not without being told, and some of them give themselves credit for more than they've got. I once went out with a doll who said to me, I am the glamorous type. I'm the glamorous type. I said, so what? Blanche, I cannot imagine any witch of a woman casting a spell over you. Stanley, that's right. Blanche, you're simple, straightforward, and honest. A little bit on the primitive side, I should think. To interest you, a woman would have to... She pauses to perform some kind of indefinite gesture to make her point. Stanley slowly lay her cards on the table. Blanche, yes, well, I never cared for wishy-washy people. That was why when you walked in here last night, I said to myself, my sister has married a man. Of course, that was all I could tell about you. Stanley, booming. Now let's cut the rebop. Blanche, ooh, so loud. Stanley, come out here and let Blanche finish dressing. So she's outside the room. So you really get a sense of who they are in this dialogue individually, and there's the clash is already evident early on in the play between these two. So also within this play, symbolism plays a critical role. Although this play is kind of meant as a realist drama in many ways, Williams was kind of impatient with over-realistic theater. He wanted a heightened sense of reality. And we can see this in the highly poetic language and the presence of the melodramatic Blanche often pushes against the constraints of realism. One of the ways the play resists its own realism is through the use of symbols. So, a symbol, and as just to refresh the memory, symbols are marks or signs or words that represent an idea, an object, or a relationship. So, and Streetcar is using these symbols, resist realism. It kind of keeps the play in between reality and allegory. So let's look at some of the symbols. Of course, right off the bat, one of the main symbols that you just can't miss is the streetcar, which we meet as Blanche is arriving onto the scene, and she says, she's talking about the streetcar. She says, "Oh, you were just talking about Brutal Desire, the name of that rattletrap streetcar that bangs through the quarter, up one narrow street and down another." Stella says, "Haven't you ever ridden on that streetcar?" So there's clearly kind of a double meaning intended here. So this streetcar that's in the play is both a real object and a central theme of the play. It's a vehicle on rails. You can get on it, but you don't control where it's going. You share the ride with other people. You can't get off whenever you want. Williams called the streetcar the ideal metaphor for the human condition. Why would you think that a streetcar could work so well as a metaphor for that idea? Let me know what you think in your discussion post. And again, we have another instance where Blanche is talking about the streetcar that is laden with kind of some double interpretations, symbols with the streetcar. Blanche is faintly hysterical as she's arriving to Stella's apartment, and she says, "They told me to take a streetcar named Desire and then transfer to one called Cemeteries and ride 6 blocks and get off at Elysian Fields." So you can see there's a kind of an interesting symbolic as well as a physical journey taking place if you think about Desire taking to a cemetery and then the Elysian Fields. So you've died and gone to heaven. There's a lot to read into this text right here. There's a lot to read in here about the definition of desire and where it should take you, where it does take you, how desire takes you to different places at different times. Also important in the play is this idea of desire, which is represented at times by Stanley's animal joy, as Williams writes it. We encounter desire in the form of sexual desire. This correlates with the description of Stanley in the stage directions that describe him as possessing an animal joy, as being implicit in all his movements and attitudes. Since earliest manhood, the center of his life has been pleasure with women, in the giving and taking of it, not with weak indulgence dependently, but with power and pride of a richly feathered male bird among hens. He sizes women up at a glance with sexual classifications, crude images flashing into his mind and determining the way he smiles at them. There's a primal, brutal, and Darwin quality to this description that positions Stanley within a sort of wolf pack, stalking flocks of women to select a mate. Later on, Blanche articulates this notion directly, labeling Stanley a survivor of the Stone Age, and the evening poker gatherings as gatherings of apes. And this leads up to the famous Stella scene during one of those poker games that takes place. Just to set the scene a little bit, Blanche has turned on the radio during the poker game and she's dancing. Stanley gets impatient by the interruption and the noise, and he flies into a rage and he throws the radio out the window. And Stella moves to intervene and yells at Stanley, to stop, being mean to Blanche. She says, and then when he throws the radio, she's like, "You drunk animal thing, you." She rushes through the poker table. "All of you, please go home, if any of you have one spark of decency left in you." Then Stanley is approaching Stella, and she's like, "You lay your hands on me and I'll..." And then she backs out of sight into a room. He advances and disappears. There's the sound of a blow off stage. Stella cries out. Blanche screams and runs into the kitchen. The men rush forward, and there's a grappling and cursing, and something is overturned with a crash. So, the conflict over, Stanley stumbles out half-dressed, out to the porch and down the wooden steps to the pavement before the building. There he throws back his head like a baying hound and bellows his wife's name, "Stella, Stella, sweetheart, Stella." And then, it ramps up in intensity as we saw in the clip, where it's just this kind of earth-shattering yell for Stella. And then the stage directions tell us the low tone of a clarinet moans. The door upstairs opens again. Stella slips down the rickety stairs in her robe. Her eyes are glistening with tears and her hair loose about her throat and shoulders. They stare at each other. Then they come together with low animal moans. He falls to his knees on the steps and presses his face to her belly, curving a little with maternity. Her eyes go blind with tenderness as she catches his head and raises him level with her. He snatches the screen door open and lifts her off her feet and bears her into the dark flat. So, after this encounter with the violence, Stanley hitting Stella and throwing radios and being drunk and angry, he carries her off. They come together without a word, just animal moans, and Stella comes back to Stanley right after that terrible scene and violence, and we wonder why. And it seems that in the next scene, when Stella and Blanche are talking, Stella's anger and fear has melted by the thrill of the kind of raw animal passion during the night with Stanley. So the enjoyment of that, because of that, she minimalizes his behavior, make excuses for him, and argues that, he was good as a lamb when he came back. He's very, very ashamed of himself, saying, it wasn't anything as serious as you seem to take it in the first place. When men are drinking and playing poker, anything can happen. It's always a powder keg. He didn't know what he was doing. At the bottom of this whole excuses, she just says, because of this thrill, there are things, she says, that happen between a man and a woman in the dark that sort of make everything else seem unimportant. She finds in this sexual relationship with Stanley a sort of purpose in and of itself. So what do you make of this scene, of Stanley's behavior, of Stella's? What do you think of Williams? What do you think he's saying about domestic violence, about masculine behavior? Arthur Miller calls Brando a sexual terrorist and a brute, but he bore the truth. What truth is revealed through Marlon Brando's portrayal of the character Stanley Kowalski? All right. Lastly, we've got symbols, reality versus fantasy. The animal desire of Stanley is contrasted with Blanche's desire for intellectual fulfillment, but also an alternative reality, a fantasy. Blanche seems to find the animalistic carnal desire limiting and seems intent on getting Stella to see that. There has been some progress, she says, since then. Such things as art, as poetry and music and such kinds of new life come into the world. Some kinds of people have some tenderer feelings. We have got to make that grow, cling to it, and hold as our flag. Don't hang back with the brutes. So she's just calling for an embrace of intellectual and thoughtful and creativity, and for the world to be what it should be rather than what it is. Another example, another symbol that relates to Blanche's embrace of kind of an alternative reality is found in her frequent bathing. She's always taking a bath. And she says she's doing this to soothe her nerves, which points to her longing for the alternative reality, but it's functioning as an escape. Rather than confronting her physical body in the light of day, she retreats to the waters of the tub to cleanse herself and forget reality. Blanche also seems to be seeking rejuvenation through the bath water, as if it is a fountain of youth. But the effects are always temporary, as she can never permanently escape her past or her older body of the present. There's a possible link here to Shakespeare's Macbeth, in which the queen tries and fails to wash the blood from her guilty hands as well. And last symbol that I want to talk about in the play that you probably noticed is that paper lantern that's in the apartment. That was a naked light bulb, and then Blanche takes a paper lantern that she bought and puts it over it. So she says that I can't stand a naked light bulb any more than I can a rude remark or a vulgar action. Some interesting ideas to read into that. Is there a connection here to Stanley being a naked light bulb? The paper lantern points to Blanche's desire to obscure and soften reality. She wants to mask her sordid past and her present appearance. The lantern diffuses the stark light, but it's only temporary, and it can be ripped off at any moment. In the softer light, she is able to somewhat maintain her facade of the naive Southern belle. Her suitor, Mitch, angrily tears the lantern off so that he can see Blanche's face, and she cries, "I don't want realism, I want magic." A paper world cloaking reality also appears in the song Paper Moon. Later in the play, when Stanley tells Stella the truth about her sister's past and the collapse of the family estate, Blanche simultaneously sings lyrics from the popular song Paper Moon. As the refrain repeats, it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. In this moment, Williams deftly wields the lyrics of an otherwise inane song to illustrate Blanche's self-awareness of her own illusions. Blanche understands that her fantasy requires the complicity of others, and while her sister Stella is willing to play along, Stanley is not. Is Stanley's rape of Blanche a final brutal attempt to force harsh, dark reality, making the intrusion of rape both literal and symbolic? Does Blanche's insistence on living in a fantasy reality cause her sister to disbelieve her when she is, for once, telling the truth? In A Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams dramatizes the conflict between fantasy and reality in the characters of Blanche and Stanley. For Williams, who was admittedly impatient with overly realistic theater, this struggle could also be seen to stage the conflict between realist and modernist theaters, with their dual desires of representing real people on stage and representing the subjective point of view of an individual character's consciousness. While Stanley is on a mission to expose the truth of Blanche's fall from grace, Blanche wants what ought to be the truth. Truth is a contentious term throughout the play, and Williams refuses to resolve the competing truths represented by Stanley and Blanche, even as the play comes to a close. At times, these truths manifest themselves as competing desires. Whereas Stanley prefers a naked light bulb, Blanche makes repeated attempts to put a paper lantern over the bulb in an attempt to soften or obscure its light. The play highlights how much of life is about the stories we tell ourselves and others, making truth a function of belief as much as it is an accumulation of facts. So what do you think? What other symbols did you notice in the play? Is Streetcar making the case that humans are animals, so they should pursue instinctual desires, or is our goal to overcome them and be more than that? What is Williams saying about gender roles, about toxic masculinity, about victims of domestic violence, about rape victims? What is the play saying about the idea of reality, fantasy, and truth? What do you think? Why do you think this play is still so popular? How does it speak to us today? That's all I've got for you. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I will see you next time.